Welcome to History in Flames. Empires rise and fall, the past comes, alive in fire and ash. Subscribe and relive the stories that shaped the world in the mud-soaked battlefields of the First World War. Mankind invented a monster. A rolling fortress of steel, designed to cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and shatter the stalemate of war. Steel plates, caterpillar tracks, a 6-pounder gun, is slow deafening and mechanically fragile, but it worked. They called it the tank. But the machines that crawled across the Somme in 1916 were crude, slow and unreliable, little more than metal boxes armed with hope. No one yet knew that, within a generation, these machines would evolve into the steel beasts that decided the fate of continents. This is the story of how the tank evolved from the trenches of World War I to the frozen steppes of Russia, the deserts of North Africa, and the ruins of Berlin. The tank became the symbol of modern war. In World War II, it didn't just fight battles, it defined them. The idea was simple and desperate. The Great War had locked armies in a frozen line of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Machine guns and artillery ruled no man's land. Infantry died by the millions for just a few meters of earth. In 1916, the British unveiled a secret weapon, the Mark I tank. Steel plates, caterpillar tracks, a 6-pounder gun. Slow, deafening, and mechanically fragile, but it worked. Across the Channel, the French designed something far more elegant. The Renault FT. When the war ended, most nations thought tanks were a passing fad. Few understood that these early prototypes had changed warfare forever. Only a handful of visionaries saw the potential. Britain's JFC Fuller and Basil Littlehart, Germany's Heinz Guderian, the Soviet Union's Tukhachevsky. They imagined armies of tanks, not to break trenches, but to move fast, strike deep, and destroy the enemy before he could react. It was a bold idea, and soon the world would see it in motion. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles forbade Germany from building tanks, so they called them tractors instead. Meanwhile, France built heavy fortress tanks, designed for defense. Britain focused on infantry support tanks. The Soviet Union experimented with fast BT tanks, using ideas from an American inventor, Walter Christie. In the 1930s, the world's armies were still debating one question: was the tank a support weapon or the spearhead of a new kind of warfare? Adolf Hitler was about to answer that question. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Their tanks, small, lightly armored, were not the strongest, but their coordination was revolutionary. A new word entered the world's vocabulary: Blitzkrieg. In the spring of 1940, France waited behind the Maginot Line, confident, cautious. The Germans went around it. Through the Ardennes, terrain considered impassable for tanks. In less than 6 weeks, France fell. The Panzer III and IV, backed by fast-moving infantry and deadly dive bombers, tore through Allied defenses. Tanks had proven their power, not as support, but as the deciding weapon of modern war. But even as Germany celebrated, other nations learned fast. Britain built the Matilda and Crusader. America began designing its first Shermans. And deep in the Soviet Union, engineers were preparing something extraordinary. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. 3 million men, thousands of tanks, across a front stretching 1,800 miles. At first, the Blitzkrieg rolled on unstoppable. Then, the Germans met the T-34. Sloped armor, wide tracks, 76mm gun. It's fast, rugged, deadly, a masterpiece of Soviet engineering. The Germans were stunned. Their shells bounced off its armor. Their own tanks could barely keep up. The response came quickly. The Panther and the Tiger. Heavier, more powerful, built to destroy the T-34 at long range. But they were complex, slow to produce, and prone to break down. On the Eastern Front, tank warfare became a brutal arms race. Every month, new models appeared, new guns, thicker armor, faster engines. But in the end, quantity had a quality all its own. The Soviet Union built more than 80,000 T-34s, enough to crush the Wehrmacht under sheer weight of steel. On the Eastern Front, the tank was no longer just a weapon, it was survival. But while the Red Army pushed the Germans back, far away in North Africa, a very different kind of tank war was unfolding. Rommel's Afrika Korps used speed and surprise to overwhelm British forces. The British answered with the Crusader, the Valentine, and eventually the American-made Grant and Sherman tanks. In the desert, tanks fought without cover, maneuver, dust, and visibility decided life or death. By 1943, the Desert War was over. But across the sea in Italy, and soon in Normandy, the tank would fight again. In 1944, the Allies returned to Europe, and the tank led the way. Shermans, Churchills, Cromwells, rolling east through France, towns and fields liberated under their treads, but the fight was far from over. Ahead lay the Siegfried Line in the heart of Germany itself, in the Ardennes. The Germans struck back the Battle of the Bulge. For a moment, it seemed as if history might repeat itself. Another breakthrough, another blitz. But this time, the Allies held. The Bulge collapsed, and the road to Germany lay open. From the east and the west, the Allies closed in. By April 1945, the tanks of two great armies met on the Elbe River. In Berlin, the last tanks fought among the ruins, a final struggle in the heart of a dying empire. The war in Europe was over. The age of the tank had defined it and would shape the world that followed. The war in Europe was over. Cities lay in ruins, armies exhausted, nations forever changed. The tank born in the mud of the First World War had come to define the Second. From the ashes of Blitzkrieg to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, from the deserts of Africa to the ruins of Berlin, it was the tank that carried the war's weight. And though the guns fell silent, their echoes did not fade. The tank became a symbol of power, of fear, of a century remade in steel. The machine that once promised victory became the warning of what victory could cost. The age of the tank had defined an era, and it would shape the world that followed. From the mud of 1916 to the ashes of 1945, the machine that changed war and the world. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more. Share your thoughts below.